Welcome to the histology PowerPoint that features epithelial tissues. Much like the first PowerPoint that we did, you will follow along with the note sheet and fill in the notes as I go along with them. Please feel free, as you go along, to pause and replay some of the slides if you need further assistance. A group of cells working together to perform a specific function is called a tissue. In our bodies, we have four main types. Epithelial tissues provide lining and covering of the body. For example, these would be found in your skin, the inside of your mouth, and also the inside of your intestines, just to name a few. Next, we have the connective tissues. These are the most varied, meaning that they have the most different types, but also they are found all over the body. These include things like blood, your bone, cartilage, and also fat. Next, we have muscle. Muscle comes in three different types: skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. Last, we have nervous tissue, which helps transmit impulses to the brain as well as other places in your body. There are some general characteristics for epithelial tissues. The first is that they cover a body surface or line a body cavity. So for example, the inside of your mouth is obviously a body surface and it's a lining. They are going to form most glands, such as your salivary glands, thymus gland, thyroid gland, is all going to be contained with epithelial tissues. They also protect, much like your skin protects you. They absorb, secrete, and aid in ion transport. They filter, much like your kidneys filter your blood, which is also where you have a type of epithelial tissue. And they're going to form slippery surfaces. If you think about the inside of your mouth, that is a slippery surface. It's lubricated. Some special characteristics of epithelial is that the cells are very, very closely packed together. There's virtually no little or no space between them. You will see a difference as we go on in the other tissue types with this. I'm going to jump down to support by connective tissue. At the bottom, you have what is called a basement membrane. That is where they are going to be connected to another type of tissue. So while epithelial is the main type of tissue, it's also going to be connected to the rest of the body or another body part via something called the basement membrane. How they get their nutrients is something called diffusion. So nutrients diffuse across the cell membrane. They also are able to regenerate very, very quickly. So, for example, your skin, when you get a scar, what happens is your cells are regenerating so quickly that they are not able to reform the pattern that was there because they want to regenerate and close up the wound. These regenerate the quickest out of all four tissue types. In naming epithelial tissues, there is a specific type of, or two different types of names for them. So if you have one layer of cells in an epithelial tissue, we call this simple. So you can have simple squamous, simple columnar, or simple cuboidal. But what that means is that you have one layer of those types of cells. Stratified, on the other hand, means that there's more than one layer of cells. It is layers upon layers. There are also, in addition to the simple and stratified, there are also some cell shapes that we need to look for. The first is called squamous or squamous. These cells, in my opinion, look more like irregular cells. They are my fried egg cells, as I like to say. They have the shape of almost like a fried egg. They also tend to look like scales. Next, we have cuboidal. While it's not a perfect cube, it's more square, and sometimes they're a little bit more round. So it almost looks like a roundish cube. And then we have columnar, which are long and thin. Sometimes it can be a little bit pointed at the end, but basically what I want you to know from this is that they are longer than the cuboidal and the squamous. Okay, when we name a specific type of epithelial tissue we want to look at, first, is it simple or stratified? So how many layers does it have? And then second, we look at what is the shape that we do. So we look at how many layers and then the shape. So for example, we could have stratified squamous or squamous. What that means is that there's many layers of scale-like cells. Also, we also have, in addition to the cells, we also have some goblet cells which produce mucus. We have things like cilia, which help, that are more found in like the digestive tract. And then we also have keratin, which is a hard protein, which I'll learn more about. We also have two specialized tissue types, which are called pseudostratified, which means that they're false stratified, which I'll get into in a little bit, and transitional, which means that they're going to go back and forth between cuboidal and squamous or squamous. Our first tissue type here is simple squamous epithelium. This is a single layer of your scale-like or flat cells with a pretty circular nuclei. There are special types of this. There's one that's called endothelium, which is going to be the slick lining of hollow organs. And we also have mesothelium, which is going to line peritoneal, which is your abdominal, pleural, which is lungs, and pericardial cavities. In addition, you're going to find that these are most likely going to be found in the air sacs of the lungs, where there's only one layer of cells. So the function here is to pass materials by passive diffusion and filtration. I'll come back to this in a second. You're also going to secrete lubricating substances in serosa. The location is renal corpuscles, mostly in the kidneys, but also the main priority one here is the alveoli of the lungs, which are those air sacs. Now those are, once again, one cell thick. And going along with the function, the passive diffusion, if you think about what the air sacs of the lungs do, they are exchanging the CO2 and the O2 back and forth in the lungs. So what happens is the blood comes through, it gives off the CO2 through the cells and then exchanges it for O2, and the blood takes that and goes on. You really need to have one cell layer here. It makes it so much easier, and you wouldn't be able to do the job if you were. In addition to the alveoli of the lungs, we also have the lining of the heart, blood and lymphatic vessels, and lining of ventral body cavities. Okay, so let's take a look at what these actually mean. So if you can follow my pointer, this right here, up in the left-hand corner, where I'm circling back and forth, is one cross-section of an air sac of a lung. That's an alveolus, okay? So what happens is each one of these little cells all around here, okay, are a simple squamous cell. So these dark purple dots all the way around are your nuclei. This all around here is just that one whole layer of the simple squamous. Now, what I also want you guys to see is that usually with every epithelial tissue, at some point there is a free surface. This is the space in the inside of that air sac. That's the space that the alveoli or the simple squamous actually opens up to. So this is space where the blood flows through. That's the free space. There is also at some point a basement membrane going through. These are what the squamous cells look like. You can see the scale, and then the inside right there is the nuclei. Okay, next we have simple columnar epithelium. This is, once again, simple meaning single layer. This is your column-like shaped cells. Some would bear cilia, but mostly what we're looking for here is the microvilli if needed. And the microvilli are mostly going to be found in your intestines, which we'll talk about in a second. The function are absorption, so absorption is going to come into play in a second, secretion of mucus, enzymes, and other substances. We also have ciliated type propels mucus or reproductive cells by ciliary action. Now, in the non-ciliated form, we're going to line the digestive tract. So that function of absorption is really going to come into play here. Because if you think about the small intestine is where you absorb most of your nutrients in the process of digestion. What the simple columnar cells allow that to do is they allow the food and the nutrients to be absorbed into the cells, and then they pass it on to the blood. In the ciliated form, they're going to line small bronchi, the uterine tubes, and the uterus. So what happens there is, as it's going by, you're also allowing the egg to travel through, and the cilia help the egg travel down the tube. Okay, one more thing. It's kind of hard to see. These are not as column-like as I would like them, but this is a column-like cell. And each one of these little dots up here is a nucleus, and all of those are cells. So in class, I will show you a little bit more of what they look like. But right here on the edge, you can see the cilia as well. Okay, so the last part of the simple epithelial tissues is your simple cuboidal. Now, simple cuboidal is basically cube-like cells with nice round nuclei. So what you can see here is all of this right here is a ring of cuboidal cells. Each dark dot in the center is your nuclei, and your cells are basically all right here. 1, 2, all the way around. Now, behind that is that basement membrane that I referred to as before. And then the inside is your free surface. Now, in this picture, they're in a nice ring because this is a cross-section of a kidney tubule. But in other pictures, you'll see that they're actually in a nice long line. It depends on what location you're looking at. The function here is secretion and absorption, and then your location, which is primarily going to be the kidneys, but could also be small portions of the small glands, and then ovary and thyroid follicles. Okay. Next, we have the stratified epithelial. Remember that they contain 2 or more layers, so we can just have 2 layers, and then it makes it stratified. They're going to regenerate from below. The major role here in all of these types of tissues is protection, and they are named according to the shape of cells at the top layer. I want you guys to remember that, because when you're looking primarily at stratified columnar, the bottom cells are going to be different, but the top cells are going to look columnar. The other thing is that the deeper layers of cells appear cuboidal or columnar, and the thickest epithelial tissue is adapted for protection. Okay, first we have stratified squamous. Now there are 2 specific types. One is called keratinized, which means that a large portion of the cell is going to contain a hard protein called keratin. What happens is in the skin, as the dead skin cells move up, because the bottom layer is going to reproduce and push those older ones up, as it gets pushed up, the cytoplasm in the cell, as you can see right here, these layers right here are becoming keratinized. So it means as this bottom layer right here is where we have new cells forming. But as that gets pushed up, the cell cytoplasm fills with this hard protein called keratin, and this makes for waterproofing. We also have non-keratinized, which is going to form moist linings of body openings, like the inside of your mouth. The function here is mainly protection. It's protecting underlying tissues and areas that are most often subject to abrasion. So if you think about it, the inside of your mouth and also your skin on the outside of your body is where you get a lot of cuts, bruises, and this is protecting against any injuries and bacteria coming in. Location, like I said, forms epidermis. It forms the lining of the mouth, esophagus, and also the vagina. Next we have stratified cuboidal. Basically, once again, layers of cuboidal cells. Your main functions here are going to be absorption and secretion, and it's going to be in your sweat glands, your mammary glands, and your salivary glands. Okay, this is stratified cuboidal. A lot of people get this mixed up with simple cuboidal, but there is a main difference. You see that here's one layer, and here's two. Here's that free space that we were talking about, and here's the basement membrane. But all we need to look at is shape, and this is nice and cube-like, and then you have one layer and two. So that's what makes it stratified cuboidal. Lastly, we have in the stratified is we have stratified columnar. The description is that the bottom layer is cuboidal, while the top layer is columnar. So we are looking at that top layer. Now, in a lot of pictures, this is the tissue that I actually do not like to teach the most, because it is very hard to tell in a lot of the slides that the top layer is columnar. It almost looks like it's a stratified cuboidal. The function is secretion, absorption, and protection, and we have locations of the pharynx, anus, uterus, male urethra, and the vas deferens. So let's take a look here. Here is that bottom layer. It almost looks more cube-like. The top layer right here is that columnar layer, and here's your free surface. In between all of these cells right here are those goblet cells. And if you can remember from the beginning of the PowerPoint, goblet cells produce mucus. Now, once again, I just want to show you that this is the top layer, that's columnar, and then you have your bottom layer, which is cuboidal. Here's the basement membrane all the way around. Okay? Okay, pseudostratified columnar epithelium, or as I like to call it, pseudostratified columnar ciliated epithelium, because a lot of times we can show cilia. The description is that all cells originate at that basement membrane. Only the tallest cells reach the free surface. By definition, it looks like it's stratified. It is not. It's actually one layer of cuboidal cells. What gives it the appearance of being stratified is the fact that the nuclei are at different levels. A lot of times this is going to contain goblet cells and also cilia. The function is the secretion of mucus. Here we have locations of the non-ciliated type and the ducts of the male reproductive tubes and ducts of larger glands. Ciliated variety is going to be lining your trachea. Okay, if you think about your respiratory tract, you want cilia there to track any particles, bacteria, things like that, and help you out. Now, the picture is not the best, but you can see here, this right here is those cilia. Down here is the basement membrane. This is a goblet cell. But this right here, these are all columnar cells. They are different shapes. This one's very spindly, but it's going to look like it's layered. But these are individual cells, and because they're nice, long, and thin, and the nuclei are at different levels, it's going to give you the appearance that it is, in fact, stratified when it's not. Okay, lastly, last tissue here, we have transitional. Transitional is just that. It goes from looking cuboidal or columnar to, in fact, looking squamous. Now, the bottom cells here, as you can see, the bottom cells, if you look closely, are going to be your columnar or cuboidal. At the top, they're more squished, so they're going to look more squamous. What happens is the cells contract and then expand back to their normal shapes. So here, these cells are actually contracted up here. These cells are non-contracted. The function is that it stretches and permits the distension of the urinary bladder. So if you think about it, the urinary bladder is going to constantly stretch and then contract as it's pushing the urine out. So this tissue is basically giving its structure to the function. Location is it's going to line the ureters, urinary bladder, and part of the urethra. What I most importantly want you to take from this is that your top looks squamous, your bottom looks columnar. It's different from stratified squamous or squamous because stratified squamous looks very, very flat. This actually just looks like you sat on a balloon. So it's not completely a stratified squamous looking tissue. It's not as flat as that. It's flattened, but it's not as flat. Hope that makes sense for you.